This is Justin.
And this is Haley, and you're listening to The Price of Avocado Toast.
We're a married millennial couple wanting to normalize conversations about money. We want to hear about your highs and your lows,
The do's and the don'ts on your path towards financial freedom. Hi, Toasties. Welcome to Price of Avocado Toast.
Whether you're a first-time listener or you've been following us from the start of this thing, we're so glad to have this conversation with you today.
It's been a very difficult week for basically everybody.
Yeah.
And it felt like we needed to get on the podcast and talk about some of the things that have gone on in the world and how we can take action moving forward instead of just like sitting on social media.
Yeah, last week there was obviously the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and we were pretty heated on Instagram throughout the days and days afterwards. And obviously there was the beef with the woman from Canada that kind of, modified the issue or became like this weird pseudo issue that just felt disingenuous. And so our thought was we're going to use our platform, even if others won't, to speak out about these things, whether or not that affects followers or something like that. Like the amount of followers we have is curated because we want those people in our corner. We want those people supporting us and on our side. And those people are going to listen to this conversation and hopefully take something from it.
We have thousands of people every single week listening to our podcast and thousands of people following us on Instagram. And I personally think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't use this platform. We can be shitty micro-influencers or whatever. Anyone wants to try to insult us by calling us whatever. If you have no idea what we're talking about, just know that last week Canada hated me.
Yeah, basically you asked a Instagram finance content creator in Canada with like 20,000 followers her thoughts on the shooting.
Then, but I didn't really ask her thoughts. I asked what was Canada's perspective on what was going on, and it was twisted so beyond backwards. And I don't want to do this podcast talking about that because that really, there is a lot that went down afterwards that was completely inappropriate. I was verbally assaulted on Instagram for like 3 days and called a see you next Tuesday by a few different people, and it really impacted me. And I know that that's something that's to be expected when you have something so public, but I was so shocked. I did not see it coming, and I've never been treated like that in my life, so I was like shaken.
Yeah, the point of asking that question though and calling that out is like, because people are saying like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, that's the point of a grassroots movement. I think that's what frustrated me the most about it was like speaking out on whatever type of platform you have, whether it's 5,000 followers or 20,000 followers or a podcast that hasn't hit 100,000 downloads or a podcast that has 1 million listens a week. Like, when you speak out about those things, your listeners hear your perspective, and maybe some of them need to hear that perspective or that kick in the butt to actually do something to affect change, to make change. And it's important if you have that type of platform to use it. Like if you just have a few followers, sure, I get it. But even then, you're 200 followers or your 300 followers, maybe you can affect change through a couple of them. Like that's how grassroots movements start. So to just like assume that it doesn't matter is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it's really harmful advice to tell anyone like that they're small and that their voice doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how small you are.
Yeah.
Your voice is very, very powerful. You could be just one person speaking out and doing the work that needs to be done. And we need people like that. It takes one brave person to stand up and make change happen. Because a lot of other people are scared of actually doing anything. People get on Instagram, they get on Facebook, they talk about things when they happen. And this goes beyond just like the gun violence issue in America. We have a very big gun violence issue. But anytime something big happens that makes people mad and America gets divided, there's a bunch of arguments and stuff, right? We go to social media, we bitch about it, and then what? Nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I feel like people need to use their platform, whether you are just in a small room of like 5 people or you have thousands of people following you. You need to use your voice if you feel inclined to do so, because people need people like you. They need people who are going to stand up and say what needs to be said. And not everyone's going to agree with you.
Yeah.
That's the scary part, I think, for people. They're scared to say things and speak up because they don't want to hurt people's feelings or insult their family members who disagree, but we need that. Your voice is important. And so I wanted to take action and use my voice on our podcast because I think that we have important voices and we have a lot of people listening to us. It's important.
Yeah. And we don't need to get on here and spout all of our thoughts in super deep detail about the gun violence issue and the
You already did that last Tuesday.
Like the addiction to weapons that we have in the United States. But if somebody wants to have that conversation, we can have that conversation. Like, I have a bachelor's degree in criminology. I had to take some courses in constitutional law. I'm not a lawyer, but I have an idea of the Second Amendment and ideas of ways that different people interpret it, and ideas about the true need for an AR-15 style rifle or something like that. And if somebody wants to have those conversations, we certainly can. But yeah, if you were on Instagram, you saw exactly how we feel. The point of this episode, I think, is more so to help others understand what they can do if they're feeling discouraged, if they're feeling like there's nothing they can do, if they're feeling like they're an insignificant part in this big world that is really messing up right now.
Yeah. I remember when I was living in Sweden and Sandy Hook happened. I remember I woke up, and because of the time zone, I woke up and saw that it had happened several hours later and felt so disconnected to the United States. I felt like I wanted to help, but I had no idea where to start. I was way over in Sweden. What was I going to do in Sweden? And I felt the exact same way last Tuesday when I was here in California, not in Texas. So it was a very weird feeling to kind of relive that. And it's interesting because there have been hundreds of school shootings since Sandy Hook until last Tuesday. But for me, it really hit different being in elementary school. And I relived the way that I felt with Sandy Hook. I was like, okay, these are the same feelings of like these little tiny children. And then me being like, oh, I want to do something. I want to help. But where? Where do you even start? What do you think for someone who's in a position where they're like, okay, well, I want to do something. I'm feeling drawn to take some sort of action, but I don't know where to even begin. Because I know that's where a lot of people are at, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast episode today. So where do you think they should start?
Honestly, one of the first things that I would recommend people do is learn and gain knowledge on whatever it is that you're feeling particularly called about. If it is the gun violence issue in America, research the data behind gun violence, research the terminology that comes up, research, maybe I say the word big players, but like people that are already doing this activism work. Like, knowledge is power. And if you can fight a poor argument with knowledge, then that's the first step, is like just become knowledgeable about it. And that takes work, of course. And it also unfortunately takes maybe hearing from people that like you don't always agree with, but maybe they have knowledge that you can gain in this area. I'm not saying put yourself in harm's way by like having conversations with people that are dangerous to your mental health or your physical health, but there are some people who know maybe a lot about guns, and you could ask them some questions and say, hey, can you explain this to me? Or can you explain this part of a gun to me? Or how it changes the firing speed or this or that, or maybe you talk to somebody who's like really well versed in law and you can say, hey, can you explain the Second Amendment to me and like maybe where that all comes from and stuff. Like talk to those people and get knowledge on it. That's the first thing I would say to do.
That's funny because I feel like that's exactly what I was trying to do when I was talking to people from other countries last week. Just like, what does it look like in your country? What
Mm-hmm.
are your gun laws? What's the process of obtaining a firearm? How does that look like? When you get your license, how like can it get taken away? I learned so much about Canada last week just from talking to people in the DMs that actually wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
In Canada, they won't even let you get a firearm if you've been recently divorced. Like it's extensive background checks. And if I also learned that United States has their castle laws where we can, have the right to defend ourselves and our family if someone were to like break into our house, we can act in self-defense if needed. Well, in Canada that's not the case. You can have a gun, but you don't have that right to act in self-defense. So I learned so much just talking to people from other countries about how things are effectively working over there. And then I also learned that no country is perfect. Other countries who have really, really strict laws still have gun violence issues. This is an ongoing piece of work that I feel like so many countries are working on right now, but I personally feel like we're really behind. So that's why I was seeking to speak to people who live elsewhere to learn from them and figure out like, well, what does this look like over there? How could we maybe replicate that? Now I know that me learning about Australia's gun laws isn't going to help me go change them tomorrow, but it
Yeah.
helps me learn about ways that maybe we could change them in the future and vote that way.
Mm-hmm. It seems as though the United States has this adoration with like rights,
Mm-hmm.
which we do. Like that's not a hot topic or like some like crazy take. Whether it is gun rights or free speech or whatever it may be, we have this like this pull towards our own rights even when it may affect others. And there's moments where I think to myself like that makes sense. You should be able to have the freedom to do those things when it like doesn't affect others, right? Like for example, I'm very much so a liberal dude in the sense of like your sexual orientation or your gender identity has nothing to do with me. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. And therefore, I support your right to live your life however
Mm-hmm.
you want to be in the truest, most authentic self, right? As a teacher, having to go through active shooter drills and somebody that was previously in law enforcement having to go through those drills from the other side is really terrifying. And those moments do affect me. And I worry that those moments will affect me more drastically in the future in the case of like a real scenario. And I just don't know why we have these pulls towards these rights that were written in the 1700s by a bunch of dudes who thought that black people were 3/5 of a human and had like just no concept of what weaponry would advance to. I don't know why we do that. It's so strange to me.
Well, I think that that's one of my biggest takeaways from the nice Canadians I spoke to, because there were a whole lot of unkind Canadians. If you can't tell, I'm a little bitter. I'm
It's
I'm
okay.
holding on to
You
this
can this can be a cathartic experience for you
it
to
was
get it
not
out.
fun. But anyway, a lot of kind people came into my DMs and talked to me about the fact that they thought that the people in Canada were like, well, I don't understand why this is a conversation. I don't understand why there are two sides. there are not two sides. Children were just murdered at school, period.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a gun argument. It's a fact that this was disgusting, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not here to argue that we should have our rights, just kind of going back to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting to me because immediately here, you know, people are like, oh, this is sad. They cry a little bit. And then they're like, but wait, my rights.
Yeah.
Immediately. And that's just not the conversation that's happening in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And in other places that do allow firearms, that maybe they have a different process, but it's not like guns are illegal. So it was interesting to find out that, like, that's why people were like, well, what do you mean the conversation? There is no conversation. This was horrible.
Yeah.
Period. Which is what I think we all think it should be. But then we're holding on to those rights. So going back to some things that we can do, some people were like, write your senators, talk to all the people. What were some of the things that you did with, you had an app that you downloaded?
Yeah. Somebody I follow on Twitter had mentioned this really great app that they use to reach out to their representatives to support particular movements or actions that they're looking for. It's called the 5 Calls app. What you can do is enter in your zip code, and it will tell you the representatives that support, or I should say that represent your area. It gave me our congressman who supports the district that we're in, and our 2 state senators. Of which, you know, I already knew those 2. I actually didn't know our congressman since moving up here. I thought it was a different person, but we're like just outside of the district, so we're in another district. Nonetheless, it's a totally different congressman than I was thinking. So I got to download this app, the 5 Calls app, and there's several different scripts if you have a particular action you'd like to reach out to your representative about, or they'll just give you the number straight up and you can call and leave a voicemail. And so I left voicemails for our congressman, Doug LaMalfa, and I left voicemails for our senators, Barbara Feinstein and Alex Padilla. And I just urged them all to take action on universal background checks. Over 80% of the United States supports universal background checks. That's a nonpartisan issue. That's, a overwhelming majority. There's no reason that we should be hung up by this. Even gun owners who want safety support this. And so I was just urging our congressmen and our senators to take action on this and to work with their colleagues, both on their side of the aisle and on the other side of the aisle, to get something passed so that universal background checks can happen. Now, I personally believe that there's a lot of other steps that go into stopping gun violence in America, and universal background checks is just like dipping our toes in the water. There's a lot more that we can do. And that's coming from somebody who enjoyed shooting when I was in the police academy. Like, I have talked about wanting to buy a gun so that I could go shooting, not hunting because I don't hunt, but, target shooting and stuff. But there's just no need for an AR-15, and there's no need for somebody to be able to purchase these weapons as easy as people can. And so I was urging our senators and our congressmen to take action by using the 5 Calls app. So I highly recommend anybody that's listening, if you just want like an immediate thing you can do, download the app, super easy, and start making calls.
I love that. And they're not going to call you back.
No, maybe they won't.
I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. But I would put money on the fact that they're probably not going to call you back.
Probably not.
But there's someone monitoring that line.
Yeah.
And getting those calls and taking messages. So it's going somewhere. It might not be going directly to their ears, but it's going to their office. Mm-hmm. And that's important.
Yeah. Well, our 2 senators are pretty Democratic, so I'm sure they're probably already working on it. Our congressman's very Republican. Like, he was a big supporter of the January 6th insurrection, so that's not a great feeling. but that's okay. I'll call him again. I'm going to call him again at some point this week and just every week probably make calls just like, hey, just wanted to check in, like ready for that conversation whenever you want and ready to see you actually support the people in your district.
Love that.
Yeah.
And we will definitely link that 5 Calls app in the show notes so you guys can just go and click it and then download it, because I think that this would be a really good first step for people.
Yeah, it's low stakes, and it's something that everybody can do. We all have smartphones on us.
I know we don't like talking on the phone, but they're not going to answer anyway.
Probably not.
Okay, so the next thing I really wanted to talk about, and I think a lot of people listening to our podcast can relate to this, is feeling the draw to like donate funds in some way, shape, or form to something that is supporting whatever you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of going back to what I said earlier, like this doesn't have to just be on the gun violence issue. This could be anything that you are like really passionate about. And if you want to make change, you could find a nonprofit and donate there.
Mm-hmm.
But in regards to the gun violence issue, there's so many places you could start. But the top two that I think of, that I hear about all the time, I see them circulating social media, I see them on commercials on the TV, are the Sandy Hook Promise and Every Town for Gun Violence. They are...
I think it's Every Town for Gun Safety.
You are right.
Yeah, I was like, Every Town for Gun Violence. That sounds like a lot.
That sounds horrible. Nope, definitely not violence. Every Town for Gun Safety and Sandy Hook. And you can find those basically anywhere. And if you are looking for a place to kind of support, not like necessarily anti-gun, but like pro-gun safety, I also found there's one called Project Safe Child. They're an initiative to raise awareness about firearm safety, and I think that that's really important. If you are feeling drawn from what happened in Texas to do something, but you're not necessarily trying to like take guns away from people. I know everyone has different levels of feelings with all of that, but maybe that's something that you might want to donate to. And donation doesn't have to be $5,000. It can be $5. It can be $1.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the GoFundMe for the victims?
Mm-mm.
There was one like giant GoFundMe for all of the families of the victims, and they raised like over like $1.5 million.
That's great.
In like a day.
I'm sure it's gonna get way higher than that.
Oh,
too.
I'm sure. And that's just, and then there was also one for Irma's family specifically, because her and her husband both passed away.
Which is heartbreaking.
So heartbreaking. Can you kind of tell people what happened there?
Yeah. One of the teachers passed away, and then her husband a couple days later passed away from a heart attack that was onset due to stress and grief. And it actually is something that happens. People do call it broken heart syndrome, and it's a heart attack caused by that just deep grief and stress. And so he passed away. They have 4 young kids, young enough, teenagers, and now both parents are gone. Like, there's just heartbreak of the deepest pain. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, and some people want to donate directly to specific families instead of larger organizations, so their GoFundMes are a good way to do that. I would stress with GoFundMes just to make sure that they're actually going to the right people, that they are organized by someone who knows them. There are some things going around.
Well, actually, when moments like this happen, GoFundMe locks down any created accounts that have to do with the issue that's arisen before they can like fully vet it.
Really?
Yeah, and so usually GoFundMe restricts it pretty hardcore to make sure that it's absolutely going to the right spot, because a lot of people will kind of capitalize and kind of scam based off that trauma, which is absolutely gross.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, I know.
That's really good to know.
Really glad to hear that too. Yeah, you only find that out, when you're on Twitter and there's a new travesty every single week where there's a new GoFundMe.
Just another day in America.
Yeah. Speaking of Twitter, this is kind of one that is just a little sidebar. Follow people on social media that are activists and are speaking out about these things.
Yeah.
One of the really great accounts that I follow is Fred Gutenberg. Fred's daughter, Jamie, was killed in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida several years ago. And I've followed him since. He's an outspoken advocate for gun safety in America, and he doesn't pull punches. He uses some pretty harsh language with people, and I appreciate that because he holds people to task, and he's really trying to to help do the work to keep Jamie's memory alive and not let her die in vain, to actually let there be change from his daughter's death, which is heartbreaking, but I get a lot of value from following him. So I highly recommend that for others too. Like, follow people on social media that you see are already doing the work and learn from them, because they're probably going to point you in the right directions, which is important.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So another thing that you can do, and this is something that personally I want to get better at, is actually going to protests, going to these events where people are speaking out. Now, I'll be honest with you, my activism bug, or my activism fight, whatever you want to call it, didn't really spark until the last few years. And that's when we were living in COVID and had a newborn. And I didn't really feel like going to these big marches and movements that were probably not the safest.
Yeah.
It's something I want to get better at now that we come out of COVID, and particularly now that we're in the area that we're in, because there's not a lot of voices like ours in this area. And so I want to be kind of a beacon to speak out a little bit more. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. And I urge others, do some work getting onto social media like Facebook or Instagram, following some local accounts to see what protests are happening, or maybe some cool marches that you can support that don't cost you money. You can be there in solidarity and be there to speak out without having to donate your funds if you're low on funds. This is another really low stakes way that people can get involved, and it's one that I'm really excited to start kind of pushing more towards.
Yeah, my friend Charlotte, my good friend, she participated in a march in San Francisco. I think it was in January of 2020, and we had a brand new fresh newborn and could not attend, but it was for gun violence and making sure there was not another one. But unfortunately, there have been more.
Yeah.
But you might think, when protesting, like, why do this? What are we doing? Well, you're raising awareness, and that's huge. You're also using your voice, and people are listening. Whether they agree with you or disagree with you, they're listening. They see you, and the more people we can get out there, the better. It's going to cause a bigger ripple effect the more people that are protesting. And it doesn't have to be some people have this idea that, like, protesting is just some violent thing, and that is so not what it is.
Yeah, that's a media spun narrative. Like, the point of it is to show that, hey, a large portion of folks support whatever this cause is, and it would behoove our representatives to make changes based off of that. Otherwise, they will no longer be our representatives. They will be taken care of appropriately when the next election comes around. Yeah. One of the ways that I've tried to use my voice a little bit more has been through school board meetings. So I've spoken up at some for my brother's district where they were just being absolutely ridiculous. I spoke at one up here where there were some anti-CRT folks that were trying to, like, preach about, white supremacy and the glorification of the white learners. And I was really proud to speak about diversity and equity and inclusion in the classroom. So that's another way, just a little sidebar. If you're like me and you're hesitant to go out, you can start gently by speaking up at, like, board meetings and stuff.
I feel like that's intimidating.
It was very intimidating, because I was totally new up here, and there's not a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, you should totally be reading these types of books in your classroom and stuff. But it felt important to mention that to them and to speak out on it.
I started listening to Wallet Activism, which I gave it to you.
It's such a good book.
I did a poll on Instagram asking people who've listened to it, and it was like 4 people had listened. Hundreds of people hadn't. And I'm like, wow, we need to talk about this. So first off, I'm on a mission to get the author on our podcast for sure, because I guess she lives nearby.
Yes, Tanya Hester, author of Wallet Activism. And she wrote another book before
40
that.
40 minutes away. Yeah. Anyway, I was listening today for 2.5 hours while I was getting my eyelashes done, just going down the rabbit hole of, like, well, how can I take action on things that I am really passionate about? And I came home and I said, Justin, I think I need to join a school board. I need to go be on a school board.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that before, but you were like, that's kind of a scary area, because it is. And you think of something like that, where you want to take that much action to be a change in a community that is going totally the opposite of the way that you want to go, can be very scary. And anytime you are standing up for something in a group of people who disagree with you, it's really intimidating and scary. But sometimes that's what we need.
Yeah, but people are also
horrible,
particularly when it comes to their children. And that's why the school board stuff scares me. A lot of people are like, if it affects me, okay, I'm starting to get mad. If it affects my money, I'm starting to get really pissed. If it affects my kids, now I'm like a psychopath, right? And that was probably a bad word. I shouldn't say psychopath, like, because you rightfully should care about what affects your kids. But in this stance, with some of the beliefs of what's getting taught in the classroom and what's not, parents are ridiculous in some moments. And I'll say that to anybody who thinks that CRT is being taught in the classroom. Like, CRT is a high-level legal theory for universities, not some sixth grader who, like, is just figuring out that people can be transgender.
Well, and you know firsthand what people can do to families on school boards, because I have a client who's a family friend of ours who is on a school board, and they've been harassed. So you get it. But even then, even though I hear all her stories, I was listening to this book and I was like, this is what I need to do. So vote for me.
Vote for Haley.
Another thing that I kind of want to touch on is like talking to your kids. And obviously this is age appropriate, like how you're going to have these conversations with your kids, but whether you think they're too young or not, they're still watching you. They still know what's going on in one way or another, and they're still going to have memories about what happened, no matter how young they are. So we need to be having truthful conversations with them about what is actually happening, because if we don't tell them, they're going to make up their own narrative. Mm-hmm. And they're going to go to school and they're still going to be hiding in a closet during a lockdown drill. Mm-hmm. And I was telling Justin the other day that, like, when I was teaching 4th grade, I had some students that wouldn't sign out on the bathroom sheet, and I'd get really mad, and I'd be like, you need to sign out when you go to the bathroom, because when we have a lockdown, it's not if, it's when we have a lockdown, I'm locking the door and I'm not letting you in. I'm not letting anybody in. I'm locking the door, and that's it. And so if you're gone and I don't know where you are and you didn't sign the sheet, I can't tell the office that you're missing, and then you're gone and it's not, no one can find you. Yeah. And I had to be so stern with these 9-year-olds about, like, if you don't write your name down on the sheet, you're not going to be let back in the classroom. And that sounds kind of like an intense conversation for such a young kid, but they're playing video games a whole lot more intense than that. And if we don't tell them what's going on and be real with it, they're going to make up their own narrative. And I just think it's really important to be transparent with them.
It is. And I think people have this idea that you use super in-depth and like intellectual language or even like loaded language. No, there's safe ways to talk to kids about, bad guys who want to hurt people, right? You don't use words like they're going to come and massacre everybody, right? You just say, using gentle words like, hey, the teacher's job is to keep you safe. And it's really important that you listen to your teacher when they say that you need to do these things in the classroom. Or, hey, remember, like, when you're on campus, you need to listen to the adults who are there working with the students. Like, there's ways to have safe conversations about this stuff. And obviously those, conversations are based around active shooter situations on campus. But even other conversations, right, about the diverse community we have around us. Even as simple as talking about maybe walking by somebody that's in a wheelchair. There's a healthy way to have a conversation with your child about humans with disabilities and being like, oh, yeah, they are just different and they, are maybe, I don't know, maybe they have some type of, I hesitate with this idea that I guess I should rephrase. I hesitate when some people try and make it too childlike with like, oh, they have this superpower. And it's like, no. You don't phrase it like that. Right, you can just say, oh, this person is in a wheelchair. And that's how they get around. Isn't that cool that they're still around?
Yeah, like, it's a matter of fact. We use our legs to walk around. They use a wheelchair. Period.
it's exactly like some people say, yeah, again, like, oh, they have a superpower, or they do something else. It's like, well, that kind of like defeats the purpose there. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are healthy ways to have these conversations
Right.
with kids without being too over the top or trying to like dumb it down with them. And I don't have all the answers for that, but there are people out there who do. You can follow and like reach out to people who really dive into like, hey, what's a safe way you can talk to your kids about this stuff? Like, God, you purchased freaking like 7 books 2 weeks ago about teaching our kids safe touch and like how to say no when you don't want somebody to touch you, or where do people's hands go. And Calliope loves reading these books at night, and they're great because it says like, yeah, like when I don't want to play, no means no, and my friends have to listen, and when they don't listen, I find a safe adult. And it's like it just gives them very clear language. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Shout out Donna Jean. she posted on Instagram recommending this book for consent, and it was perfect. So yeah, like if you don't know how to have that conversation with your kid, and if they are of school age, I would reach out to their teacher and say
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm having trouble with like how to bring this up. What do you think? How should I have this conversation at home? What are some conversation starters? I bet you there's books. I bet you there are books about gun violence for children,
I'm
which
sure
sounds
there are,
horrible, but
unfortunately.
I bet you that is a thing if you look on Amazon. Like I said, if they don't hear it from us, they're going to figure out their own narrative, which might be way scarier than us just having a transparent conversation with them.
Yeah, 1,000%. So the final kind of step that you can take if you're feeling called towards making change is one that I do want to give with some reservation. And that is, you can obviously vote in elections as they come around. I really struggle with this because I'm feeling more and more lately like, not like the whole both sides argument, because I certainly don't think both sides are the same, but I do certainly feel like there are politicians on both sides who do not have their constituents' best wishes in mind and who do not act on behalf of their constituents. They act on behalf of themselves. And so I reached out to a friend on Twitter and was like, hey, how do you justify voting when it feels so gross and it feels like nothing changes? And he made a really good point. He said, voting is an act of self preservation. If we were to not vote, it could get even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, it is that important, particularly for our marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And he's a black man who speaks out often about how messed up America is at times. And I really valued his opinion on the fact that he said, like, if I were to not vote, it could get even worse, which is crazy to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to be one of those people that says, get out and vote and, like, you can change things, because that actually isn't always how it works. And particularly right now in America, like, we voted Joe Biden in and homie's not really doing much.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who thinks that he is, like, we got another conversation to have, because he's really not.
Nobody thinks he is. Honey.
Yeah, like, well, I don't know. There might be people out there like, well, thank God he's not Trump. You thank God he's not Trump, but like, just because he doesn't say dumb stuff on Twitter doesn't mean he's getting stuff done.
No, yeah, he's very, very, very unliked right now, and it's something that I'm seeing across the whole entire millennial generation is that we're starting to become really aware that the whole right and left thing is a bunch of bullshit, and they're playing us kind of against each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, they are corrupt on both sides. They're being bought on both sides. We have the NRA funding Ted Cruz like millions of dollars, and then we also have other corporations funding the Democrats. And it doesn't really matter what side you're on, they're being bought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people are getting so frustrated with. It's like, who is good?
Mm-hmm.
No one really knows anymore, because once you get to that level, you're just chasing the money.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that that's going to be everyone in the future, but I feel like a lot of people are realizing that, this left and right thing, it'd be nice if we could just like do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, our country is made that way, and it will be that way for a while. But yeah, I think voting's important, but I can see how people do get discouraged because there's a lot of corruption, and I also think that's why people feel like things like what happened in Texas. How are we ever gonna stop that if we can't stop certain corporations from funding entire political parties? That's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's just something we need to continue talking about. If a lot of people, if like 80% of Americans feel like we should have some sort of background check, I bet you 80% of Americans probably think this whole shenanigans is a bunch of bullshit. Anyway, I could talk about politics forever. I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
An important thing to note about voting, though, is even if you're feeling like you want to abstain from large-scale voting like the presidency, you should be voting for your local elections as much as possible because those people do have a profound impact on your life as well. So it's really important to try your best to educate yourself on the candidates, read the voter information packets that you get in the mail when you have the time, and really vote for those folks who you believe are going to affect and make the changes that you want to see in the world.
Love that.
Yeah.
This was really devastating. And I hate to even say this, but it's true. At this point, it's not surprising that this has happened again. And all of the feelings that everyone is feeling, the exhaustion, the just devastation, it's valid. And people get on social media and they argue about all these things, and then other people are like, well, you didn't say anything, blah, blah, and then it's just like, it's a lot at times. And if you're feeling called to step away from social media, but you still want to take action, because we all know social media isn't taking action, you're just making posts. It's not really going very far. But if you want to take action, do some of the things that we've recommended today.
Yeah.
You can do all of them. You can do one of them. Do something. You'll feel better just knowing that you're taking action with your feelings instead of just sitting there being like, well, I feel helpless. I don't even know where to start. You can start small, and you can probably inspire some other people around you to get started too.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, this is not going to be the last school shooting in America.
I wish it was, but it's definitely not.
It's not. And so working on your comfortability with activism now is going to help you feel more confident for the next time this happens. Which is devastating to say. But it's the simple truth. It really is. Which is unfortunate. Again, if you're somebody who needs to talk, you can certainly DM us on Instagram. If you want to have any type of conversation about the way you're feeling and you need support, we're here for you. If you're someone who wants to talk deeper about the incident in Uvalde, I'll gladly hop on the DMs and talk to anybody who wants. I'm just going to tell you now, I feel a particular type of way, and this is not something that I feel like I want to listen to the other side on. So if that's where you're sitting, I'm just going to say I agree to disagree, and I'd rather not have that conversation. But yeah, if you're somebody who genuinely needs to talk or needs to vent because you're hurting, we're here for you.
And I just want to take a second to thank everyone who reached out this last week. After everything that went down with the Canadian massive influencer, you guys were so kind. And any of the Canadians who decided they wanted to kindly share their side, I'm really glad that people were able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. And it does take having difficult conversations with people. That's important. It is important to learn from other people. It's important to realize when you're wrong and to learn from, I don't know, I just feel like you can't grow if you're not willing to listen. And we all need to listen a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. That's going to do it for this episode of Price of Avocado Toast. Thank you guys for hanging in on a not always fun conversation, but we appreciate you, and we're thankful that we have this platform to get to chat with you guys. Happy budgeting.
You've got this, Toasties.
Thanks for listening to the Price of Avocado Toast. If you vibed with this episode, share it with a friend that you're comfortable having money talks with. And if you don't mind, we'd love if you could rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're in need of my support as a financial coach, message me on Instagram. I'd love to help in any way that I can. Until next time.